Welcome, Jonathan, to the program. I want to ask you right off the top, before we get into the content of your book, how do you feel about these midterm elections? What is it that you see God doing?
Well, it could have been worse, and I'm glad that the Republicans got the House. It will put a check on the radical agenda of this administration, so that's a great thing. I know much more was expected, but this is very big, and I do concur that it's also in some way the best of both worlds, because we're hoping for the long term. At the same time, this is something that we prayed for. At the same time, ultimately, there's got to be revival. At the same time, today, several Republicans went along with the Democrats to basically enshrine the redefinition of marriage. So, we have to get on the ball spiritually as well. But this was a good thing that today we can say that there's a check on this government.
Well, it's true. We've got a long way to go. You're right. All right, let's talk about your book. In your book, you talk about some of the false gods of old returning to America. Tell us who they are and how they're showing up today.
The Return of the Gods, and first of all, Gene, it's got to be the most explosive book that I've ever done. I knew it was for now. It really lies behind everything that every single person who's watching is dealing with. It doesn't matter who you are, we're all in this. And, this is, I know your program is about victory. Well, if to have victory, you have to fight, and we are in a fight. And the fight is ultimately spiritual. The Bible says that behind the gods of the ancient world were actually spirits. In Hebrew, they were called the Shedim. In Greek, they were called the Daimonia. We get the word demon from it. And so when it says they're actually worshiping these gods back then, they're actually worshiping spirits. And now we know that when the gospel came, the gods were driven out of the Roman Empire. So were the spirits. It was the greatest mass exorcism in human history. That's why the West has been unique. But there is a warning, and this kind of set the stage of it. There's a warning that Jesus gave, and he said that, if a spirit leaves a man and it doesn't find a place, it says, I'm going to go back to my house. We're talking about the man, goes back, finds it empty and clean, says, I'm going to bring back 7 other spirits. So they come back to the house, repossess it. And people read this and they think it's just about a man. But at the end, Jesus says, so it will be with this generation. So the warning is that if any civilization, and we could say America, we could say the West, that has been cleansed by God, which it has been, Western civilization, if it ever turns back, if it ever turns away from God, if it ever empties the house isn't going to stay empty. These spirits are going to return because there's an emptiness, there's a vacuum. So what's happened is what we are dealing with now. We've been watching for like half a century a strange thing happening to America and the West. And it is the return of these spirits, because when you take God out, something else is coming in. And so we're watching a repossession. And these are the same spirits or the same gods that we read about in the Bible when Israel turned away from God.
Well, we're going to see so much there. Let me keep going. Rabbi Cahn, we're here. Everybody today talks about their truth. Well, that's not my truth. That's his truth, your truth, my truth. In fact, there's a major shift away from what absolute truth really is. And we really kind of get off course. So how do you explain that in the book? And how can, let's get down to, how can the church influence culture back to an understanding that there really is only one truth?
Yeah, it's great that what you just said, because it actually, I talk about it in the book. One of the signs of paganism is exactly what you just said. If you have one God, you have monotheism, there's one truth, but in paganism, you don't have that. You have many gods, so everybody has their unique truth, their authentic truth. So if a man says, I'm a cat, well, that's his authentic truth. If a woman says, I am a they, not a she, that's her authentic truth. There's no more truth, because when you take out God, you don't have truth anymore. And this is what happened to ancient Israel. And one of the reasons why, Gene, I write these books and these things is not just to reveal these things, but to arm God's people, because we are supposed to be on the offensive. We have what this culture has lost. And we are in many ways the hope that this culture, because the Lord said, you're the light of the world. And if it's getting darker, then we have to be even brighter. And we cannot be, we cannot be on the defense. We cannot be afraid of this culture. What we're dealing with is actually paganism revived. But this is what the early church dealt with. This is what Paul dealt with, So we actually have the truth, and if we are not sharing it, woe to us. We have to do that. So, the answer is still God. But we have to realize we're dealing with a pagan culture, or a quote post-Christian culture. And so we need to be even more radical.
Well, you really referred to a lot of in the Supreme Court decision on abortion in 1973. So explain on a spiritual level your opinions on what really happened that day.
Yeah, well, a number of things. One is that, when you look at the fall of Israel, when they turned away from God, and we're going through the same thing, they turned to the gods, and there were three in particular. In the book, I call them the Dark Trinity. And one's called the Possessor, the second's called the Enchantress, and the third is called the Destroyer. And when you look at America's turn from God, it comes just in exact progression. The first one, the Possessor, that's in Hebrew, the word is Baal or Baal. This is the principality that turns a nation that has known God away from God. The next one, called the Enchantress, was actually the wife of Baal, also called Ishtar in Babylon, called Ashtoreth in the Bible. And this is the god of unbridled sexual immorality. So you look at America, look at the early 60s, when we start taking God out, it all begins. And we have this sexual revolution that is everything's going right in line. But at the last one, the third one is called the Destroyer. And what it leads to, this is the most pagan thing. We said this is progressive. It's not progressive. This is regressive. Human sacrifice or child sacrifice was part of the ancient world. And so it's almost like you could have predicted that this was going to happen. The fact that we haven't had child sacrifice for a long time is only because of the gospel, only because Jesus basically drove it out. But when you turn away from God, these things come back. This Moloch comes back. So we're doing exactly what Israel did thousands of years ago. We're offering up our children, except, Jesus said when these spirits come back, they come back worse. They offered up thousands. We have offered up millions. This is nothing but paganism.
All right. So, Jonathan, a lot of people are watching and they're listening, and it's really overwhelming what you're saying. So what can people take from your book? What can they do to fight what's happening? How can they turn around, help see the turnaround in this country?
Well, the first thing is, listen, if you're in a fight and you don't know you're in a fight, you're not going to win. If you're in a fight and you don't know what you're fighting, you're not going to win. We have to realize that what the Bible said is true. It says we war not against flesh and blood, we war against principalities. Every one of us, what's happening in the world, what's happening to our children, what's happening to the culture and the media is not natural. This is, we say, even non-believers are saying this is madness. What they're doing to children, this is madness. This is what happens when you take God out. And so all the more, first of all, we have to be strong about what we believe. When you look at the people in the Bible, a lot of believers are praying, I wish I lived in biblical times. Congratulations, you're in biblical times, because this is the same time that, Moses stood against the gods of Egypt, Elijah stood against the gods of Canaan, Paul stood against the gods of Rome. This has been the pretty much the norm. It's only what we've had in the last, ages that has not been the norm. So now we're getting back to where it was. So listen, if the world is kind of going back to where it was before the gospel came, we have to go back to the beginning, which is the book of Acts. And the book of Acts was not a cultural church. It was not a comfortable church. It was radical. It was revolutionary. And that, I believe, Gene, is what God is actually doing, because as the dark gets darker, it is forcing us to make a decision. The grays are disappearing, and that's why all these things are coming back. And, the Bible really says, there's a mystery to this, that the end of the age is kind of like the beginning of the age. Everything kind of goes back home. And so I believe this could be the greatest moment for believers, but I will say a few things. One is, remember, Gideon was called to be a great hero of God, and he was actually going against a culture that was worshiping Baal. But before he could do that, he had an altar of Baal in his backyard. So he had to first get that out. So the first thing, I'm saying this to everybody, if you have something in your life that's part of this, whether it's pornography, whether it's, this is a stronghold, you have to first deal with with that. Get that out of your life. Then you can stand. God will honor those who will stand for him. I mean, all out, uncompromised. The power is now with those who are all out for God. So the first thing is that, and the second thing, let me tell you something. I don't always say this, Gene, but I have one of my associate pastors, is a very humble man, and he never did this before, and he didn't know. I was working on a book, and he had no idea what it was about. He wakes up in the morning, in like 4 a.m. He says, "I got to tell you what I saw. I saw you working. You were bringing forth a word, and all around you were these altars of these gods." And he said, as you brought forth the word, all these altars started breaking open. Now here's the thing, Gene. When I finished The Return of the Gods, it was June 24th, the day I finished it. That was the day the greatest altar in America of the gods, abortion, began to crack open. Now the thing is, in the Bible, when there's revival, it wasn't like a tent meeting back then. The sign was the broken altar. They broke the altars of the gods. Think of Josiah, Right. So I believe God has given us a very big, encouraging sign. He did that by his hand. He's saying nothing's impossible. It's not lost until it's over. And the thing is that, so the broken altar is a sign, but it's a call for radical, on fire, all out believers. That's what the age belongs to right now.
Good. Lance, I like the part about we got to get the gray out. You had a question?
Yeah, I was interested. Jonathan, it's good to see you again. What's the response been to the book? Is it what you expected? And I'm wondering, do believers mostly, they aren't surprised by what you're writing. They're impacted by the detail. But I mean, Americans know that we've been taken over by a foreign entity. But is there what kind of response are people showing you, and is it encouraging you to see the response?
I'm getting an amazing response. Somebody very famous, actually from our childhood, said they were buying tons of these to give out to everybody in his life. At the same time, I'll tell you this, Lance, that I did think that because this touches everything. I mean, it touches every controversial issue. I thought from the world there would be more pushback, but it may be because this right now mostly believers are actually reading it, more than the world yet. But I'm praying that this gets to the world and gets it, because everybody also who's watching has people in their life who are in this, deep into it. I'll give you an example, and you're right that I think believers sense this, but the detail is pretty amazing. Like, for instance, I'll just tell you one of the ancient deities, what they call the enchantress that I mentioned. It says that her ancient inscriptions, she says she has the power to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man, the god of androgyny. And so everything we're watching, her priests actually were men who dressed up as women. Well, they're back. She actually, listen to that. It says that she transitioned surgically her priests from men to women. This is what we're dealing with now. I'll tell you another thing, and this is just a quick thing, and that is that there was 1 month of the year that she especially possessed in the culture. You know what the month is? I looked at the ancient writings. The month was June. June was the month where this goddess of altered sexuality possessed it. And the sign of this goddess was the rainbow. And she was the goddess of parades, of basically, she's the goddess of pride and parades. So, and you know what? If we were living back then, we would be aware of it. You know how it ended? With the gospel coming, Constantine. They're back. And this is, we need to be prepared. So it's basically, I got to throw one more thing here. And that is that, listen, that even the Supreme Court decisions that have regarded sexuality and actually the striking down of marriage, all have taken place on the appointed days linked to this ancient deity. The day, remember, when marriage was struck down as we know it, and the White House was lit up in a rainbow, that night was the 10th of Tammuz on the Bible calendar, also on the Babylon calendar. When I looked in the ancient inscriptions of Babylon, it says that day is appointed to cast a spell to cause a man to love a man. That is the day that marriage was changed.
Wow. All right. The book, The Return of the Gods, Jonathan Cahn. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And thank you for dropping by FlashPoint. Always a pleasure. And we thank you for being with us. Thank you.